What's up, stokers of wellness and health nation? This is Marin from Marin Lazic podcast. Legends, just before we start again, I just want to remind you that this pod is brought to you by TRX Training Sydney. We're doing Zoom workouts on the straps and some kettlebell action. If you want your shoulders squared and your lats flared, head to trxtrainingsydney.com, check out the website, hit me up with an email, and we'll take you through a basic use of straps and a bit of a workout, and then we might let you in the class so you can join in with the rest of the Stoke Nations. And on that as well, you're going to have amazing core, which is kind of fitting because on today's pod, we talk about with Dr. Stuart McGill. Now, Dr. Stuart McGill is a retired professor. He's best known for his work to do with lower back pain. He's wrote a number of books about it, and also core training. We discussed a lot regarding the best ways to kind of train your core, what to do, what not to do, athletes with best core, a bit of sleep action, recovery, breath work. So it was an interesting chat. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Oh, one more thing. In the pod, we do use some big words. Well, I think they're big words. We refer a lot to proximal stability. For those that just want to keep it simple, all that means is keeping your core tight, like your midline strong or stable. So your distal mobility, which we talk about, so your extremities are more mobile and produce you more power. I think they'll make more sense as you get in the pod. But nevertheless, if you have any questions, please go to the website and write us an email, ask a question. And yeah, hope you enjoy it. You. Good afternoon, Dr. Stuart McGill. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Well, good evening to you, Marin. I guess it's morning in Aussie, Sydney, and it's evening here in Canada. And what's the date today? We're in April anyway. I think it snowed every week the last week.
We're on 21st here, and it's been sunny, which is pretty unusual for our winter.
There you go.
Yeah, Stu, can you, for my audience, could you just give us a bit of your background and, tell us about you. How did you get into your craft?
Well, I was a professor for over 30 years at the University of Waterloo. I'd done a PhD in spine biomechanics, so obviously I was asking questions like, how does the spine work? How does it become injured? What are the pathways to pain? What are the ways to train it? Et cetera, et cetera. The two laboratories that I ran, one was where we measured loading of tissues in real people and did trials and that sort of thing. And the second lab was one where we would take cadaver spines and create the injuries so we could try and get a one-to-one match between different types of load histories and certain types of damage and pain pathways. Then we started a clinic just over 20 years ago. And my colleagues thought I was crazy because our patient assessments were 2 hours long. And they said, 2 hours, what are you going to do for 2 hours? And I said, well, that's the only way I know that I can obtain the information I need to understand their history, what they've done in the past, what impediments have there been to cause them to fail? Why are they coming to us after they've seen 10 or 12 other clinical experts already? And then we did a curious thing. We followed up with every patient for the entire history of the clinic. So with every patient, we know how they came in, their patterns, what we gave them to do with their compliance, whether they did it or not, whether they got better or not. We did a follow-up after a year or two, etc. So I don't know of another clinical operation that has done that kind of follow-up. And some of the interventions that we would uh, discover the mechanisms for in the other two labs, we would try on patients on an experimental basis. And of course, we would then trial it with the patient. So it was a nice full circle. Um, but one other thing as well, my laboratories and clinic were in the Department of Kinesiology. And I understand that particularly in Australia, I have this reputation as just being a mechanical person. But as chair of the Department of Kinesiology, as I was for the number of years, it was made up of 4 subgroups: biomechanics, physiology, neuroscience, and psychosocial group. So I was responsible for representing all of them, and then different groups would ask me to consult with them, industrial groups, government groups, athletic teams, etc. So that's, I guess, how I got into it all. And then I retired from the uni 3 years ago, and now I just see patients here at BackFit Pro.
So the clinics is still open and working strong?
In order for a person to come and see me, it has to only be back pain for sure. And I don't see the fresh back pain cases. I'm the person who I see the failures. They've already been to many experts and either failed to get better or possibly were even made worse.
So what sort of people did you see in your clinic? Like, is it athletes or everyday people?
Well, the full spectrum of society. We tend to specialize in athletes, but we also see people who are really suffering. And interestingly, there's not that much difference between an elite athlete and someone that will categorize at more of the fragile end of the spectrum. They're similar in that their margin for error is very, very small. When someone can hardly get out of a chair and take 2 steps and one wrong move, and they will really pay for it. So that you have to be good to dig that person out of the hole, remove the sensitivity, and build them back once again. Likewise, with an elite athlete, you're so close to the tipping point. You can cross it for a very brief period of time. And of course, that's what peaking is doing when you're programming down to a competition. But if you keep an athlete peak, of course, they'll either get sick or injured. So you have to back off and deload for a while. But it's the same principle, I guess. And we've also had, members of royal families, top politicians, celebrities from, I guess if I said Hollywood, but, television shows. And
Can you drop some names and any big names or?
Well, there's some that have gone public, of course. What's interesting is the more money a person makes, the more secret they want it, because their reputation and cachet as either a sports performer or a actor or whatever depends on their health. So they don't tell the world that they're struggling with their back. Whereas some athletes who don't make much money, they're much more likely to tell their story, Olympians and people like that. But if you go to BackFit Pro and just scroll down the front page, you'll see a few celebrities in terms of, real medalist athletes and some actors and things like that. So those people have said, "Oh, please use my name if it will help other people," and they approve it all. But no, if you're playing in the NBA, you don't want anybody to know that you're hurt. Or,
No, that's fair enough.
If you're on the golf tour and you have $50 million a year in endorsements, you don't breathe a word of that. So it's very secret, actually.
No, that's fair enough. So, Professor, in TRX, we refer to a lot of your studies, and I was very curious when I first heard your name or you do, and you tested on pig spines. Is that correct? Is that how you sort of figured out a lot of the stuff about spine, human spine?
Well, that's a curious statement. I know there's people who go around and try and dismiss our work by saying, "Oh, McGill did their work on pig spines," and I think that's either they don't know what we do, or they have an ulterior motive. About 10% of our work has used animal spines. Now, think of every orthopedic condition and think of every disease. They all use animals, and the reason is for scientific control. So if I could get 50 identical humans to donate their spines to me, I would have a controlled experiment. Unfortunately, I can't get that. So if we can raise 50 pigs and then do an experiment intervention on 25 of them, and then the other 25 not, and then we see what damage occurs or whatever the experiment happens to be. We learn something about a mechanism. So I can give you an example. If you take a golfer, for example, they tend to have more slender spines and the discs in cross section are more ovoid. However, if you take a very strong, large framed man or woman and they're built for load, so take a big rugby prop, for example, the chance of them having an ovoid spine is much less. They have a much thicker spine. Now, when you bend a spine, or you, I'll back up to a principle now. If you bend a willow branch back and forth, it won't break. It can survive many, many repetitions of load. That's somewhat like the archetypical golfer's spine. But if we take a thicker spine, whereas a golfer can twist, it can't take a lot of compressive load. It's not big and robust enough. Whereas the rugby prop has a bigger, thicker spine, but if you bend a thicker branch, it shatters right away because the stress distribution is a function of thickness and the radial distance. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So we learned all that from pig spines. Now, I never would have learned that from humans. So that was a principle. Now we would learn what causes a disc herniation, what causes an end plate fracture, what causes a stress fracture, all on animal spines. And then, of course, we calibrate those up to applications on humans, which we don't get very many of. And if you get a cadaver of someone who's died of old age, you can't do an experiment on that because it would have zero representation of a robust fellow like you. So you're starting to see you need animals, but then the trick is to calibrate it up very carefully for humans. So people try and dismiss our work as, oh, McGill used pig spines. Well, yes, we did,
No,
but we also did the due diligence to take those mechanisms and then figure them out for human application.
no,
So does that help
no, that totally helps, and I like
explain the whole situation?
that totally, and as you said, like I don't know how people that I guess get a little bit upset about it is I'm not sure how you could do it any other different way. So thanks for that. Um, on spine health, so you just mentioned some spines are quite flexible, some spines are rigid. Is that because, with that in mind, is that why you're sort of not too keen on everyone doing sit-ups?
Every answer needs a context. So you're giving me a very general question. And, I'm not too keen on people doing sit ups. Once again, that needs a context. So if a person has a history of back pain, say they have a disc bulge,
Yep.
doing sit ups is probably not a wise choice. Now, let's take military groups around the world. So it's been traditional that the annual test of fitness, certainly in the US military branches, the Marines, the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force, and the Canadian military as well, have used speed sit ups in the fitness test. And there was some concern that training the test was causing back pain. I didn't say that. That came from the military, and then they came to me to get opinions, etc. So there was several layers of experiments done. In one group, they stopped doing sit-ups altogether in basic training. But at the end of basic training, they still had to do the speed sit-up test. The groups that did not train sit-ups, but they did core stabilizing types of exercises like the modified curl up, like stir the pot, rolling planks, etc., they had less back pain and they scored higher on the sit up tests. Now, I'm going to take other examples where we've taken athletes who have to flex their spines and hips. So let's take a top marquee UFC combative athlete, mixed martial arts or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based athlete. And they say, well, I have to do spine flexion movements and hip flexion, but they come to me and they are now out of the UFC. Their career is wasting away because they can't tolerate it anymore. So when you look at their training, they've been training sit-ups and whatnot, but they have zero capacity to train in the cage or roll jiu-jitsu on the mat. So what we do is we take that pain triggering training approach and load away. And we change that with, as I said, things like stir the pot and whatnot to wind down the pain mechanism. Now we have their back training again. They have to limit the amount of rolling in full flexion, playing guard and whatnot, if we're using the jiu-jitsu example, but they use it, they get their timing down, and they build a core of iron while they're doing it. They've never been so fit. Then when we measure Muay Thai fighters, and I'm not talking through my hat here, we've measured all of these in different groups. If you take Muay Thai fighters, as we did, and we measured hand strike force or punch force and kicking. Well, in order to kick, you have to create proximal stiffness, stop motion, and then snap the hips down to get the leg to fly. If you bend your spine when the hips pulse, you lose transmission of power across the hip joint. You don't kick as hard. So if you want to punch harder and kick harder, use your hips and then spin around the trailing leg, as you know, and then at the end, the arm flashes out. So that mechanic required an actual stop twist and a stop flexion stiffness to unleash the distal mobility. So distal speed and mobility and force production requires a good home base, proximal stiffness. You know, you can't fire a cannon out of a canoe, but you can fire it off a battleship. So you know all of this. You're a TRX trainer. These are some of the basic foundational tenets of TRX and suspension training and whatnot. So, you know, again, I hear, oh, McGill hates sit-ups. Well, when it's disabling your performance, yes, I do. If that's what you do and you don't do a lot of strength training and you have a slender spine and you're going to compete in the Olympics as a gymnast, so you're not doing deadlifts, but you're handling your body weight, I might say, okay. So do you see, McGill doesn't love or hate anything. It's an issue that requires an intelligent conversation based and founded in science. And the science has to include the biology of the person, the rate of adaptation, their injury history, all of these things. So these questions, I know they just get very simplistic on Facebook and social media. And it's very difficult to even begin a conversation with a person who doesn't have mastery to talk at a level where you can set the limits, if you know what I mean, a little bit.
No, that definitely makes sense. You mentioned core stability, and I think the term core gets a little bit confused in traditional fitness, and even I think general public. I'm not sure if they understand what a core actually is. How would a master describe, or how would you define core?
Yeah, well, first of all, I hate the word core.
Good.
I absolutely hate it. However, it's a popular word that can begin a conversation with people, but it's always going to end up with a little bit of controversy. So we need a definition. I've already talked about this idea. To get distal speed and athleticism, you had to create stiffness through the spine and torso. Now, it's no coincidence that the spine is not ball and socket joints. The discs are adaptable fabric. However, there's a ball and socket joint at either end, which is the hips and the shoulders, the only place we have ball and socket joints, but there's a design reason for that. If we had mobile ball and socket joints in the spine, you would need muscles this wide, because a ball and socket joint is made for power, but it's a very unstable joint in terms of it needs a lot of stiffness for control. So a hip joint has a lot of muscle around it, but and a deep ball and socket design. But anyway, so if I was going to define the core there, I would say it's a strategic continuum of stability and mobility to unleash the performance that's required at the moment. If I want to throw a javelin or hit a golf ball, now the whole discussion has changed, so that the torso force has now decreased, and we're going to elastic storage and recovery of elastic energy. So we're snapping an elastic band to hit a golf ball. The discussion changes entirely. Now, if you're a bodybuilder and you're training for appearance, the core is the six pack. So I guess I can go on and on, but in the pain world, if I can just show you a model here, just
Please.
a moment. I've got a full model repository on the wall here that we teach patients.
Beautiful.
But let's assume this joint is normal, and let's assume this joint down here is normal, but this one has lost a bit of disc height because it's been damaged. Now I'm going to twist the person's spine. Do you see how the majority of the motion is occurring at the joint that's lost its stiffness?
Yeah, totally.
So now to engineer out those micro movements, so excuse me, if I performed an abdominal brace to a tuned level, not too much and not too little, I would suddenly be able to arrest those micro movements. Now, if I'm going to deadlift 1,020 pounds, so say 450 kilo, that's a pretty good weight. I might have to activate my stabilizing musculature of the core to probably 60 or maybe even 70% of maximum. But if I'm just walking, if I'm going to get off the stool and walk and change my line of support between stance leg side to side, I might need a stiffening activation of 5%. So again, this whole idea of what's stiffness, what's core, you need a pretty masterful understanding of how much is sufficient to just arrest the micro movement, take the person's pain away, but not too much, because there's a compressive penalty for stiffening the core that way.
Mm.
Yeah. So, again, we get into discussions of pain control or performance enhancement.
Yes, it seems the body is like a sequence of switching it on, off, on, off, on, off. Like the whole time there seems to be the rhythm. Whether you're walking, running, throwing punches, throwing balls.
Of course it is. That's great. Athletes are fabulous pulsers.
Mm. So on that, I guess training core, and a lot of my audience will be a mixture of athletes and just mums and dads. And unfortunately, this time of when we're recording, a lot of people are sitting down a lot more than usual. What would be some of the best and the worst ways to train your core? Let's start with positive. So what would be the best way to train your core?
The answer is it depends.
Good.
So can I assume that we're training for function and not appearance?
Every time in here, this podcast is all about function.
Okay. So if we can go there, but Marin, out on the street and in the gyms, it isn't.
Yeah, I understand
most of the time, it's about appearance.
I understand.
However, let's go to adding pain-free resilience and enhancing ability. So if we define it with those two terms, We did many experiments over the years searching for the best exercises. So, as you know, I've worked with Chris Frankel from TRX on some of these, and many people. Strong First, Pavel Tsatsouline. I mean, you can name a system, and I'll probably have spent time with the originator. And what we were doing was looking for ways to train proximal stability, because that unleashes all distal athleticism, arrests micro movements from disc bulges or end plate damage or stressed ligaments or whatever it happens to be. And we kept coming up with what's called the big three. So you're familiar with the bird dog?
Yep.
And a form of it, and a very mild regressive form would be to simply raise one hand off the ground. And that's where some people who are very fragile start. And then the more robust people, we might have them drawing squares and creating muscular pulsing. We might have them doing reverse rows with a TRX system. That would be an excellent progression for the back. And then for the side plank is an outstanding lateral frontal plane mechanical strength. Well, it's a strength enhancer for sure, but endurance and everything else. And then for the front, the modified curl up, where we place the hands under the low back to shape the curve, to first of all put it in its most resilient position, really build training capacity first. But then, as I said, we may go to stir the pot. We may go to Roman chair exercises with knee raises, or, I have no idea. The exercise we choose. An exercise is simply a tool to get the job done. I want to choose the most efficient tool that spares the joint but challenges the system that we want to challenge. It might be strength, it might be endurance, it might be stiffness, it might be stabilizing. I need a bit more context to answer that.
No, for
But
sure.
anyway, the big three is pretty much a foundation for both pain and adding resilience. And then depending on the specific person, we will then build progressions off of that.
I'll put the links for those exercises as well in the show notes.
Yeah.
With the big three, and like anything in fitness world or social media, we find something good and we come almost abuse it. And what I mean by that is, yeah, we're good with like that. But what would be the, and again, I know you're going to tell me it depends, but the reps and time of each thing. So if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, right, I know what my big three is, how many reps or how much shall I be holding these planks for? And
yeah, well, that's why I write books, Marin. It helps people choose and decide on these things, because these aren't easy decisions. So if the person has pain, we've found the most productive way is the Russian descending pyramid. So I learned this system in Russia. Russians are very clever in creating more endurance without getting tired. So think of that. The American way, the European way, is you do long duration holds and many repetitions to create endurance. The Russians are more clever than that, particularly for people who have pain. So we might do a 10-second hold of a bird dog, and then they sweep the floor with their hand and knee, and then go out again for another 10 seconds. So in this way, they build fatigue resistance with repeated 10-second holds, but they don't get fatigued to the point where they break form. When they break form, that's when the pain starts to come. So the person might start to cheat. They might start to raise their leg a little bit too high now, and they're turning their spine into whatever their pain mechanism. Say it's a sensitized facet joint, or they may have a disc bulge, or whatever the original instigator that winds up their pain is. So there's a little bit of a thought on the sets and reps. And then the descending pyramid, likewise, you might do 4 10-second holds on each side in set one, 3 on the second set, and 2 reps on the third set. So it's a descending pyramid, again, in that philosophy of building tolerable endurance without ever compromising form. But will that get you to the Olympics? No. So, then we start changing whatever, load, endurance, hold times. We might put in dynamic exercise. As you're probably aware, we do a lot more neurological training with athletes than the typical trainer would ever think of.
No, definitely. I want to get into that as well. Who are the athletes with the strongest core? Who are the people that you've seen in your lab and clinic with the strongest core?
Well, you know how I'm going to answer that. It really depends. If we just want brute core strength, I'm going to mention 2 people, and they know this, so I'm allowed to say their names. The strongest pound for pound core in the world that I've ever measured is Pavel Tsatsouline. Cool. He's the originator of Strong First and the chairman. He's ungodly. So if we were into a little bit of a combative situation, he could do, an arm drag, and off that, he would do a hip toss that would throw you across the room. He's not possible to hold during a strength calibration test. He's my size. He's about 6 feet tall, or 1.8, and about 80 kilos. We're pretty much identical, and absolute Hercules. He beats all the big 260-pound UFC guys, etc. Now, the next person may or may not surprise you, and it was someone I met not that long ago, but a multi-year timber sport champion. So these are lumberjacks who swing axes from the side, cut down trees, chainsaw through logs and whatnot. That man had about the strongest anti-rotational core you can imagine. But again, it is the hips that turn, creating the rotational power, and then boom, it's a whip at the end. Now, if you were to look at Pavel doing a landmine exercise, for example, he pivots around his toes like this. So again, it's a stop twist kind of exercise that has made him even stronger in torsional athleticism. And a lot of people don't get this. So if we were doing a TRX pull and then a reach back, the motion has to come through the hips, but it's buttressed through the core and then flexed into the shoulder. But if you just lock and fuse the shoulder and do it all through the spine, you will be weak, and Pavel will throw you across the room like a rag doll. But it's the same if you're chopping a tree. If you want to do that with your spine, you will get strong for about 3 months.
Yeah, okay.
And then the disc collagen will start to delaminate. But if you drive it with the hips and the shoulders and transfer the torsional power through the spine. Now, I've measured, one of the few in the world who've measured the guys who hit really hard in the UFC. The guys who hit you the hardest are not the ones who turn their spines. Yep. They're the ones who lock their spine and they snap their hips down around the stance hip, and that leg comes around like a baseball bat and just about takes your head off. And we have full protective fight gear here. To be on the end of that is something to behold, and how a man withstands that kind of strike force without protective gear is beyond me. So anyway, that's the athleticism.
So,
and part of the myth of the core.
No. I love this. And you got me so excited because a lot of the athletes that I work with are water polo athletes, some MMA athletes, and tennis players. So a lot of those guys and girls are all about rotation. And we just mentioned it before, Pavel, obviously he's done a lot of kettlebell training and the landmine. It seems to be all anti-rotational stuff, even the power pull, TRX power pull. So would I be right or wrong in saying that for rotational athletes, resisting rotation or doing exercises that resist rotation will be way more beneficial. And then layering on that with really healthy hip mobility or shoulder mobility as well.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I've worked with some of the top tennis players in the world. And obviously, people come to me only because of back pain. There's no other reason.
Yeah.
And usually, if I have a tour tennis player, that is the key in a nutshell. More hip power and more transference through a stiffer torso. So we train hip mobility and pulsing neurology onto a stiffened torso. And you will find that you'll get here, I'll just give you a good example with a tennis serve, for example. So let's consider the pec major, which flexes the arm around. So the pec major crosses the ball and socket joint at the top end of the core. Okay, let's look at that muscle's action. Distal to the ball and socket joint, the distal end, it creates arm flexion, agreed.
Yep.
Now that same muscle proximal to the ball and socket joint bends the rib cage towards the arm. That is an energy leak. So if I wanted to serve a tennis ball and all I did was bend my torso towards my arm, the racket won't move. I want to do 100% the opposite. So if I lock down proximal, use your word core if you will, I don't care. So 100% of that muscle activation creates distal speed. So I've locked proximal. You get what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
That creates the fastest serve miles per hour. So I remember a few years ago, I was working and the announcers said, "Oh, Venus Williams is intimidating the opposition today. She's got a very loud grunt." And I thought, you're a fool. What she is doing is putting more miles an hour on her tennis serve because the grunt that super drives the intercostals and the 3 layers of the abdominal wall. When you do that, it adds even more stiffness and you get even more stiffened through here. So you get more distal velocity from those potentiated muscles. So once again, athletes grunt when they strike and serve and whatnot to add more proximal home base. So you get even more power out from the distally across the hips and the shoulders. And that's what propels the limbs, propels the arm, creates a whip, goes to the racket, and you get a few more miles an hour.
And would that be, again, a question, to create that proximal stability or that the stiffness for that split second, we should be trained like that as well, instead of holding a 2-hour plank or whatever, 3-minute planks, doing more like stiffness and then relax.
Yeah, that's
stiffness,
what I
relax.
was saying with athletes. It's much more neural training than people realize.
Yeah, and I guess we talk
power breath, as the Strong First people like to call it, or breathing behind the shield, or or it might be a all of these techniques to create appropriate pulses through the linkage is how you create superstar performance.
That's amazing. So a lot of athletes, and not just athletes, everyone's sitting down a lot. And I know for water polo, we've been talking about, how do we keep those athletes moving or how do we keep them healthy? What are some of the dangerous things, I guess, for athletes in terms of sitting down?
Well, you know the answer. The answer is it depends. If the athlete has a specific pain history, a thorough assessment will show with great precision what the mechanism is. Then they can employ the techniques of spine hygiene, as we call it. And these are movement hacks for athletes to move in a way that doesn't trigger their pain. They don't cause more pain sensitivity. They do the opposite. They wind the pain down. Now they just created more training resilience for probably some dryland training for water polo. They've got more power and speed in the water, and they may get more sitting resilience. Not that we want that, and that's a whole nother discussion. We can build training resilience in a person, but we don't want that. We want them not to sit anymore. We want that extra resilience to go to their training and athletic development. So it's interesting. You know, we give the people these devices, ergonomic chairs, and all of that, and they end up sitting even more, which has an unwanted deleterious effect. But anyway, to answer your question in a nutshell, then knowing their specific pain mechanism, we will then build a program of spine hygiene so they build more training tolerance.
Yeah, no, that's good. Is there much connection between breath work and spine health and I guess power as well?
Huge, yeah. But again, we need a context.
Yep.
So I had a patient this morning, as an example, who has a fairly juicy disc herniation. Now, when the nucleus comes through the delaminated collagen, the body antibody system, the immune system, sees that as a foreign body, and it sets up an immediate and massive inflammation. So around the spinal cord and nerve roots at that level, it sets up an inflammatory soup. Now you can see this in the person right away. They move their head down like this. They say, oh, that causes my back pain. My right foot goes on fire. Then they move their head the other way. Ah, and then I say, okay, stand up. And they're standing with antalgia. And I say, pull your hips forward. They go, ah, they've got pain down their thigh. And then they bring their knee forward, sitting in a chair, and they get sciatic pain. So in other words, it doesn't matter whether you move the sciatic roots, the femoral roots, the cord itself, it's all going through this inflammatory soup that everything is causing just a horrible situation. What I did with him was breathing. So I got him to lay on his tummy with appropriate cushions and bolsters. And then the mechanism of his disc bulge was flexion. So he'd spent too long on his knees tiling a floor, and it accumulated. And then all of a sudden, a knife went into his back. This wasn't psychosocial. It wasn't anything like that. It was an acute disc attack. Caused 100% by mechanics. So in order to release it, I got him to, he was locked in flexion antalgia. He laid on the pillows, and then I said, breathe in. Now, as you exhale, surrender your back. Now, I choose these words very, very carefully. My coaching cues, the words are very carefully chosen. Surrender. Let your low back, as you exhale, restore some of the lordosis. Now, I don't use words like that, but it's the word, the coaching cue that I need to achieve that. Surrender your low back, let it fall into the floor. Next breath, breathe in, exhale, surrender and relax your back. And he was still getting caught a little bit. I said, okay, lower your head with neck flexion. Now turn your head a little bit and push your eyebrow 1 kilo down into the floor. Bingo, it unleashed him. So I'm just romancing the breath and some of these mechanical things, because I understand the inflammatory soup and the nerve tensions and that kind of thing. Well, what that does is it helps to vacuum in the disc bulge, and then show him how to tall kneel, lunge up, stand, and all of a sudden he can pull his hips through and stand. And he says, wow, that's a 50% improvement. That's a 50% improvement with 3 minutes of breathing. Doesn't have anything, well, it may have a little bit to do with psychological relaxation, but what it does do is it gives psychological empowerment. It shows him how to use breath work, not to, again, I think the psychology gets way overplayed on this. The psychology gives empowerment that, wow, I am in control, but it doesn't dismiss the role of posture. The mechanic that worked was 100% posture. facilitated by breathing, and the psychological benefits were secondary but important nonetheless. So there's an example. Now the next athlete comes in and they have the micro movements that I was talking about like that, but they play in the NBA and their job is to box out one of the big 7-foot aggressive, the real physical players under the basket. We teach them the opposite type of breathing. Quiet belly breathing will not work for them, nor is it transferable onto the NBA court. They have to create a shield. So they breathe behind the shield, they contract the barrel, so to speak, to engineer out the stiffness, but they breathe, creating a diaphragm athlete. So here we'll put them into a side bridge and they breathe through pursed lips. So there's your training exercise to really create tremendous diaphragmatic breathing. And just one second.
Yeah, no problems.
Sorry about that.
No problems.
That'll be my mother. It's she calls every night at this time. She's 91 years old and still spitting nails. But anyway, so there's some examples. But, I think sometimes there's far too much emphasis on quiet breathing. But I gave you an example where it was perfect for the pain control and the empowerment that we needed. But then I'll see people doing breathing workshops with professional athletes, and I really wonder what the transference is. But now I'm going to argue with myself. There's a baseball team in the USA called the St. Louis Cardinals. They won the pennant 2 or 3 years ago. So they were probably, I love the Americans call it the World Series, but they don't invite the Japanese and all the rest of the world, the Australians. But nonetheless, it was probably the best team in the world. Well, we studied that team that year and the year before, and we measured the breathing patterns, the fitness, the strength, health profiles. We collected a lot of data on every player on that team, and we followed them for 2 years. We got 4 back injuries over those two years. We can predict who got back injuries with 100% accuracy. And I will also tell you, the ones who didn't get injured, we predicted those with 100% accuracy as well. So the specificity was 100% in the study. There were 3 variables that went into our prediction. One was strategic core stability. I hate that word, but you know what I mean.
Thank you.
The other one was motor control and hip mobility. So hip control and mobility. So once again, it's the rubric of proximal stiffness and stability and distal mobility. But the third one, you've probably guessed it, is quiet breathing mechanics. So I never would have predicted that in a million years. So that's what the science shows us in my little meander through a discussion of that topic.
I find it really interesting and something that I've been kind of playing around with. And it was more for recovery, I guess, getting people to breathe before we start training. And the thinking in my head before I spoke to you was just to kind of reset everything, drop the anxiety, and then we can focus on the job. But it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, like now that we're spending more time in the Flexion in front of computers and everything else, a bit of light breathing before we do anything won't hurt.
Well, again, that depends. In my world of building performance, there are times to be relaxed, and then there's the time to create a warrior. And if we're going to train, I'm brinking on fight or flight response.
Yep.
And I'm trying to create that and feed it. And the breathing will be very much a part of it. So the worst thing for underperformance is to be emotionally flat and belly breathing when I want, in certain situations, to create the beast to unleash super strength, super speed. However, if the arousal is too great and the breathing is too uncontrolled, now say you take a sprinter, for example, they can't relax because of sprint very much. See, when a muscle contracts, it does 2 things. It creates force and it creates stiffness. So you pulse your strength to be quick. I can tell you several stories of some top UFC fighters. And when you get to know them after a while and spend time with them, they'll tell you the hardest part of their job is controlling the fear that comes from when they leave the dressing room, walk through the stadium, and climb into that cage. That's one of the most loneliest things you can do, a man or woman can do in their lives. Very fearful. Now, if fear creates stiffness in their body and you throw a punch with some residual stiffness, you're going to the hospital very, very quickly. It's not like losing a tennis match. It's a very serious consequence. So the control of fear quite often is done with breathing drills, which is a foundation in martial arts, as you know. But when they walk out to their selected music, the breathing and the skipping, the looseness, it's all a strategy to get the frame of mind where they have to control the rage, control the fear, but then they have to unleash it strategically. Do you know what I mean?
No, totally.
Yeah, so the mental game of this is huge. Absolutely.
No, it's something I'm really curious. I want to learn more about it.
Oh, and what you're saying, I think I know the coach you're talking about that was telling his athletes between rounds just to breathe, calm down, collect yourself. So there's a time to rein an athlete in, and there's a time to do the opposite. Just unleash some rage. But anyway, these are wonderful discussions.
No, I love it. It's as a former athlete and someone that loves sport, one of my favorite things, Stu, is to actually watch not just what happens on the field, but what happens in a change room, and what you spoke about before, when an athlete needs to walk from a change room to the cage, or if an athlete has in Australia Rugby League, for example, if an athlete makes a mistake and the opposition scores, what athlete does after, and kind of behaviour change. A lot of athletes in Australia at the moment are like kind of really practicing breath work in between halves, quarters, and I think it's a lot to do with anxiety plus recovery as well. So it's quite interesting.
You're a wise man, because very few strength coaches, people who enhance performance, would be totally oblivious to what you just said, and yet it is so important. And great coaches don't miss any of that. That's why on teams there are sports psychologists and physiologists and mechanists and technique coaches. Great teams. I think of some of the great models in the world, like AC Milan, the great soccer club in northern Italy, and the team that they have supporting the athletes is exactly what you are saying. They have someone watching all the time, the reactions. And as soon as a player is psychologically beat, watch their posture. It gives it away every time. Goes into flexion, head comes down. Get your head up. Let's, get some of that pride back, and no pain, optimal performance, and show the world kind of thing.
Well,
the Russians are very good at this.
Yeah, totally.
The Russians are very good at this whole game of posture and psychology and strength and will.
The posture, when you just mentioned that, one thing that I found fascinating was when Conor McGregor fought Aldo in a fight for his first belt. And I mean, obviously, McGregor was relentless with the mental game before the fight. But Aldo, before the game, had his head down. He just didn't want to look Conor at all. And he lost the fight in 7 seconds or 9 seconds. And his posture just almost gave it away. And even the stiffness you spoke about, they analysed the fight, and Aldo's right hand was just shaking, and it was almost a trigger for Conor to throw his hook when he saw the shake in his right hand.
You're a student of the game. You're fabulous. There's a great MMA analyst named Robin Black. Do you know Robin?
Yeah, I think I follow him on Instagram.
Yeah. Robin is very, very masterful, and he doesn't miss a twitch, an eye twitch. And the way he calls the color in the fights, and makes the observations that you're making now, only the true sport connoisseur and scientist is just so plugged into that.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Good for you.
Thank you.
You're an impressive guy.
Thanks. Last question, and it's just again a bit of a selfish question because I'm curious about it. Me as an athlete, I used to overtrain and under-recover. I was a classic, so my recovery wasn't great. So the recovery is something I really I'm really fascinated. Again, it's like how do you improve someone's recovery, and sleep is one of those tools that we all need to work on. And I was just curious with sleep and spine position. Is there anything that we should be like thinking about, or anything you aware of that that maybe we shouldn't be doing in our bed? The reason why I'm asking this, I get a lot of clients that go, they're back sore and they go like, I slept funny. And to me, it was always a really weird thing to say because I always thought sleep wasn't meant to hurt your back. So do you have anything on sleep and posture, I guess?
Oh, I've got lots to say about it, and the answer has to start with yet again, it depends.
Okay.
So what we're doing now is an exercise in pattern recognition. When a patient or an athlete comes in and I'll say, tell me about your pain patterns, and they say, well, getting out of bed is really tough. I have a lot of morning stiffness and it works out after an hour or so. And there's several possibilities there. Their mattress might be dead wrong. For example, a person built like you and me, in the sleep literature, we would be categorized as triangles, broad or more pointed hips and shoulders, narrower waist, so that when we lay on the mattress, we've got pressure points under those high points. So we would do, generally speaking, much better with a firmer mattress, but a very generous pillow top to take the edge off. But if you're what the literature calls a square, so these are usually bigger, heavier men and women who sleep on their back, and quite typically they snore. It's all part of the pattern. They tend to do better in a memory foam. So they don't change position, they don't roll, they just sink into the foam and everything gets supported. But if you or I were on a memory foam, that wouldn't be good, because with our body heat, we'd sink into the memory foam. And then when we wanted to roll and change posture, it's a lot of work to roll up out of the depression. You wake up, and now if you have joint instability, say you've got an ACL deficient knee, or you've got a little joint stability in your lumbar spine, now you will get sharp pains in your back. So yes, when I roll over in bed, I get a sharp pain in my back or whatever. Good. That's the primary sign of joint instability in the spine. So do you see how we're looking for patterns now to interpret them? Anyway, someone might have a neck disorder where they turn their neck one way. Now, if they completely surrender and relax, the neck is unguarded.
Yeah.
And it is quite easy to sensitize the tissues of the neck. Same with the disc bulge in some people, not all, but some. Say someone has a sacroiliac joint problem. All day long, they're under load, holding their pelvis together. They go to bed and they turn the wrong way without the stiffness. And all of a sudden they say, I just cracked into pain. So these are, movement instabilities or movement catches, and they happen in bed. So, I might say to the person, if I suspect that, how many pillows do you go to bed with? And they say, well, I've got one between my knees, I got one under my knees, I've got two under my head when I lay on my side, and I've got a folded towel under my midsection. Sir, you have joint instability. It's a giveaway.
No, this is great, because something I think about, like, there's so much more science about sleep, importance of sleep. And, we got technology now to measure your sleep. There's Apple Watches, Whoop bands. But the one thing that hasn't really caught up to technology is mattress. Like, I feel like, there's still not enough. How fast technology moved with to measure your heart rate, HRV and everything, compared to a mattress that's, perfect for your spine and everything else. And even if you go to a traditional shop, like the bloke in a shop, with all due respect to them, they wouldn't know stuff that you just
No.
mentioned to me. They wouldn't even ask us questions.
Right.
So
That's why in my book, Back Mechanic, there's a whole section on choosing a mattress.
no,
So there's
I'll
some science to consume. And then at the bottom end, there's no substitute. You've got to go lay on it and
yeah,
just tell the salesman, I need an hour. Please don't disturb me.
yeah, for sure.
And try it for an hour. And if you do it for 10 minutes, you'll never know and you'll end up buying the wrong mattress.
No, I'll put it in a links for sure. Thank you very much. I won't hold you. I know it's getting late. It's probably dinner time. You got to call your mum as well, so you don't get in trouble.
She'll be in bed now.
But where can people reach you? Like, I mean, what's the best place to reach you for my audience and athletes?
Yeah, I'm not a social media person. My attitude is either you're on social media or you do your job. You know, you can't do both. But having said that, we do have a website, backfitpro.com, and my textbooks are on there, videos, and our courses. We were just in Australia in
I
February,
saw it actually.
and we put on some courses in Sydney and Melbourne and whatnot. But you know, we've got podcasts there and articles and things like that. So that's as a resource. Go to backfitpro.com. Now, apparently, my daughter, she runs for us Instagram and Facebook, and my only instruction to her is it has to be content rich.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's
so that's she runs that. But go to the website is probably the best.
No, I think Stuart, like I like to observe during this time, and you know, people are sitting down more, people are running more, and I think you're definitely a person to go check out, and I'll definitely send my audience towards you because obviously you got wealth of knowledge, and I hate to say it, but I think people will be experiencing a lot more back issues, back pain than before this pandemic started as well. So
no, I think you're probably right.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I'll send my audience to your websites and your. And,
okay, thank you very much.
I'll be in touch.
And,
I'll send you before.
Hope that helped you, Marin.
It was amazing.